coming. Much appreciated. My name is Noel, and we're here to do a little performance for you. The performance is basically on my new children's book, which has just been released. It's called The Legend of the Flute Player, and it's been published by HarperCollins India. And yeah, we're going to have Yun Sung Cho on the flute. He will be playing parts of the. Sorry, I adjust. He will be playing the flute for the story. It's based on a flute player. And we have Simran Shah, who will be performing. But before we begin, I'd like to just say a little bit of thanks. I want to thank the author. I'm not the author. I'm the author, so forget that. I'd like to first thank the illustrator, actually, Marina Menina. She's in Russia. She's not here today, but she did a lot of beautiful work for 3 years working on this book. So I want to thank her. I also want to thank Krishna for having us here, HarperCollins, and my editor, Tina Narang, who has put her faith in this book. And I want to thank these two Aurovillian youth for agreeing to perform with all of us today. And the book is available on the side over here with Seza at the table. So if you're interested at the end or anytime, you can go over there. So thank you again. And I'll begin. So the legend of the flute player. A long time ago, in the valley of the great mountains, there was a small town where lived all the greatest musicians in the land. From anywhere in the valley, music could be heard day and night as all the musicians played their instruments so that they might be known as the best. In this town there lived a young boy named Avayar, whose only wish was to play beautiful music for everyone. But Avayar did not have an instrument to play. He prayed and prayed with all his heart to have an instrument so that he might play his music for everyone. One day, while walking in the forest, he heard a sound coming from near a tree. He went to the tree and looked around. There, upon the ground, was a short stick with many holes in it. As the wind blew across the holes, the stick made a small, sweet sound. It gave Avayar an idea. He picked up the wooden stick and began to carve more holes into it with his knife. Then he ran back to the village. In the village, all the great musicians had gathered in the town square to compete and see who was the best. When Avayar arrived, he jumped upon the stage and began to play his new instrument quite proudly for everyone. The other musicians began to laugh. "But this is not music. It hurts the ears to listen to this boy," cried one man with a violin. "And what kind of horrible instrument are you playing?" said another man with a drum. "I have never seen this before." "I call it a flute," replied Avayar. "I made it myself." "Well, whatever you call it, it is not good for playing music," laughed a woman nearby. "You'll never play music with that thing. Better to throw it on our bonfire and listen to us play, little laddie." All the musicians laughed. For a moment, Avayar felt sad, but he knew that there was something special about his flute. He knew that one day he would play beautiful music for everyone. So he jumped off the stage and began to walk away. Then he turned and said to all the great musicians, "I will go into the mountains and stay there until I can play the most beautiful music ever heard." Then he walked into the dark forest. and disappeared into the mountains. For 1 year, nobody in the village saw Aveyar at all. They had forgotten about him until one day he appeared out of the forest and joined the musicians near the town square with his flute in his hands. I have been in the mountains listening to all the birds and creatures of the forest and playing my flute, and this is the music that I have heard. Then Aveyar began to play his flute. The music that he played was very nice, and everyone was surprised. You play this flute of yours very well, said one man. You have learned much while you were away. Please, play us more so we may hear this new instrument. No, I cannot, replied Aveyar. I have not yet discovered the most beautiful music, so I shall return to the mountains and continue to listen and practice. And so he turned and left, disappearing once again into the forest mountains. For 3 years, nobody saw Aveyar, but from time to time they wondered what had happened to him. Then one night, he appeared at the town square again with his flute in his hand. I have lived in the mountain and listened to the waterfalls and the streams flowing down the mountainside, and this is the music I have heard. And with his flute, Aveyar began to play. This time, the musicians were even more delighted to hear his flute. Your music is coming along very well, said one woman. You are good enough to play with us. Come and join our music. Aveyar stood tall and replied, No, I cannot stay. I have yet to discover the most beautiful music. I must return to the mountains and continue to listen and play. So he turned and left, disappearing once again into the mountains. Many years passed by, but nobody saw Aveyar. They began to wonder if he would ever return. One day, after 10 long years, a young man appeared in the town square. In his hands was a flute. The villagers were surprised to see how much Aveyar had grown. What music can you play now? Play for us, demanded one musician. Aveyar stood before them and replied, For many years I have listened to the wind blowing through the trees and the caves of the mountain, and this is the music I have heard. And with his flute, Aveyar once again began to play. The musicians all sat still and were amazed at this new music coming from Aveyar and his flute. This music is truly wonderful, they all said to each other. This is the most beautiful music we have ever heard. Please, please, Teach us how to play this music, they begged Avear. But Avear refused. No, I cannot. I have not yet discovered the most beautiful music. I must return to the mountains and continue to listen and to play. But what could be more beautiful than the music you have just played? Asked the bewildered musician. Yet Avear just turned silently and left, disappearing once again into the mountains. 5 years went by, then 10, then 20, and still nobody in the village saw Avear. So many years and decades went by until most of the older musicians and people who knew him had died, and the memories of Avear had slowly faded into bedtime stories. But a few musicians continued to remember him. Until one night, an old man with a long gray beard appeared at the town square, where all the musicians were gathering once again. The villagers began to wonder who this old man could be. But then one older musician noticed a strange object in the old man's hand. It was the flute. Why, this is Avear, the boy musician with his flute, cried the old musician. After so long he has returned. But I thought he was dead, cried one woman. I thought it was just an old story, laughed another musician. Everyone be quiet, said the older musician. Please, Avear, share with us your music. Avear stood upon the stage, and with a soft, gentle voice, he said, In the deepest cave of the highest mountain, I found a silence so pure and sweet. I listened to this great silence without playing my flute, and in it I heard the most beautiful music in the world. For 12 long years I listened to the music of the silence, until one day I picked up my flute and started to play. I played and played for a very long time, until my hair grew long and gray, and I realized I was an old man. Then, with today's new dawn, I awoke from my sleep, and the music of the silence whispered to me that I must play this music for you. And then Avear began to play his flute. He began to play one long note slowly and softly, until it became yet another note, and then another, until a vast melody of music seemed to float in the air everywhere. As the power of this music began to touch the people with its pure beauty, it entered their inner hearts and minds, and they began to feel themselves grow very silent. As the music grew within them, it began to open each of them to an immense joy they had never felt before. They began to feel their own unique music, awakening deep within themselves. When finally the music stopped, the villagers looked up to see that Avear was no longer there. He had disappeared. The great musicians looked at each other with a new joy still singing in their hearts. They no longer felt the need to be the best, but only to share their own music with each other. After that night, Avear and his flute were never seen or heard again. But some people say that if you are very quiet and listen very carefully when walking in the valley of the great mountains, you can hear a flute player still playing his music. The end. Thank you. I want to again thank Simran and Sun Young. Sun Young has composed the music himself, and Simran, Young Sun has composed the music himself, and Simran has done her own choreography. So I thank both of them for participating. Thank you very much.